have you ever seen this shell before? Well, it's often seen washed up along UK beaches. I think it's absolutely gorgeous, and the other day I was lucky enough to come across the species that actually creates and calls the shell its home, the Common Whelk. Now, it might just be a snail, but hold on, because this has some surprises in store that you might not expect. So let's dive in and learn all about this species. Okay, so welcome to my channel. I'm not going to apologise for that because I love a pun, but see what I did there? I'm a marine biologist, obsessed with all things sea life and sharing about it, and I'm particularly interested in the slimy and the weird and the marine invertebrates which this species falls right into. So this is the common whelk. Its Latin name is Buccinium undatum, which sounds very fancy, but I will just be calling it the common whelk for the rest of this video. It loves to live anywhere with like sandy seabeds, so that's a lot of the UK, and it can be found in across the Atlantic Ocean, so in North America, Norway, Brittany, and places like Greenland. And it is actually the largest sea snail you can find in the UK, up to about 10 centimetres. And I think that's part of the reason that this shell is like a classic childhood memory for me. I used to find them washed up on the beach or after like a stormy walk, and they're just like this big, beautiful sort of shell. Like, I know that there's other places in the world that have much bigger and probably much more colourful shells, but to me, this was sort of it as a kid. It was the cool one. And because they often like to live on the lower shore, so they typically like to live about 20 to 30 metres down, but can live down to depths of 1200 metres, you don't often see the actual snail that produces this shell. And other creatures like hermit crabs love to use them as their own shells once they've washed up. So I've seen hermit crabs in these shells far more often than the actual snail themselves. So I was so delighted when I finally got to see one for the first time, and was like really pleased that it looked like a black and white cow. I love black and white cows. I think they're the coolest, and I just love the pattern on them. I think it's really striking. The shell itself is so gorgeous and actually quite tricky to paint. It has these beautiful swirls that go around the body, like following the line as it swirls up that sort of conical shape. But it also has these lines that go down the body sort of vertically, and it creates this gorgeous, colourful crisscross pattern. But this pattern is somewhat easier to see on shells that are washed up, that are not living or have been not living for a bit longer, because there is a layer on the shell created by the snail while it's living called the periostratum, which is a protein layer that it produces to protect the shell from corrosion. Corrosion? I thought that only happened to metals. Well, corrosion is actually something that happens to all materials. It is not just metals. The definition of it is some surface that has been sort of deteriorated over time by interacting with its environment, typically chemically, and more specifically electrochemically, which means that ions, which are things in all the elements that make up the actual like shell and the environment and the seawater and all of that, like to swish around a lot of the time. So that's what sort of causes this degradation. And I think it's really cool that there's something on there that they've evolved to protect against that. The common whelk is actually carnivorous. Yep, it eats meat, which is just really weird to get my head around, that a snail eats meat. I'm just assuming they go along chomping up some seaweed, but no, and it gets even weirder. On the front of its body is a part of its body called a siphon, and this pulls in water from the sea that it lives in to a chemoreceptor, which is something that senses chemicals in the water, and it's able to then use that to sense where there's going to be animals that it wants to eat, or potentially, if it's not going to eat sort of living animals, it can also scavenge as well. They hunt creatures that are like crustaceans, so that would be like shrimps or crabs, bivalves, worms, and to do so, they do it in just such a weird way. They are able to drill through the shell with their tooth, which is called a radula. Now, this is really specialised and very strong. To get through the shell, it sort of has to be. And once they've made a small enough hole, they secrete acid, which is produced in a gland in its foot. On a snail, the foot is referred to sort of the big giant muscle that it sort of walks along, the thing that wiggles to make it move. And once the acid from this gland has gone into the shell, it dissolves it and slurps it back up. I imagine a bit like a seaweedy, lovely smoothie. Great. But they can also hunt in another way. So bivalves, which I mentioned earlier, these are things like mussels. Bivalves are called that because there's two shells attached at a sort of a hinge. And so you can think of things like cockles or mussels, or just imagine sea creatures that sort of have that sort of shape and are sort of connected together. And what it does is it uses its really strong foot, which is that big muscle, to pull apart those shells. Because one of the great protections of a bivalve is that having those two shells together means that you can keep them locked, unless, of course, you have a whelk trying to get a snack. And then, once it's open, that's sort of game over, and it's able to eat and have a bivalve buffet. Ooh. So these whelks are both male and female, and once they've mated, they lay eggs. Eggs? Yes. I'm every time it's just more shocking the more this goes on. And I really wanted to include this part about the eggs because it's something you see washed up quite a bit. And honestly, they look a bit more like a tumbleweed from the ocean than they do actually eggs. But they are eggs of this species, and they're even bigger than it. They can get quite big. They can be like hand size. They're laid by the female whelk, and about in each of the little like circles within this sort of egg tumbleweed, around 600 to 2,000 eggs can be laid. They don't all hatch. Some are often they're all sort of laid, and the ones that do hatch, they eat the rest as food. Again, just going for that carnivorousness, but also to help sort of boost genetic variation, give the species longer term chance of success in the future. Female whelks can actually store the sperm of their male mates, mate with lots of different males, and then sort of save it all up until the best time to lay the eggs for the best chance of survival, and then lay it all together. So they're also not only are they eating their brothers and sisters, they're eating their stepbrothers and sisters as well. Great. It should also be mentioned that whelks are really important sort of fishery foods, and I grew up in Kent where there's lots of seafood stalls, and selling cups of whelks is a common thing. They're fished by putting pots down with bait in, so those chemoreceptors can smell the bait and they'll march in there. They're protected in size by the sort of size of the bar, so any small snails will be able to get out and will be dropped out, and it's really important that we clock and analyze the sort of size at which, and which then hopefully relates to the age that we can sort of keep fishing and also keep it sustainable. So for example, in one place that's governed by what is called an inshore fisheries and conservation authority, they were studying it, and they had the size limit kept around 45 millimeters, when that sort of wasn't deemed as best for the species. And often in sea creatures, sort of the older they are, the better at spawning they are, so the better at producing lots of young they are. Wasn't enough, so that was sort of upped in 2020 to 65 millimeters. So it's really nice to see that these are being monitored and tried to be fished as sustainably as possible. And it was just an absolute pleasure to paint. I mean, this is a really cool looking species. Shells are always so gorgeous, and the only thing to say now is whelk. I hope it's been interesting. And which species would you like to see me paint next? I'll catch you in a video next week, everyone, and please help support me and my channel by signing up to my Patreon, where you can see exclusive behind the scenes footage and extra videos. I will catch you all with another video soon. Bye everyone.